Okay, I'd just like to introduce Dr. Jason Condon from Sturt University. So Jason's background's in soil chemistry and specifically in relation to acidification and nitrogen cycling, and Jason's done some work on fertiliser management, carbon sequestration, nitrogen cycling and salinity management in Vietnam.
So I just want to acknowledge, I can't use that, Helen Burns and some players that we partner with from farming system groups up at Holbrook, Temora and up at Condobolin as well. So working in acid soils, it's pretty hard to get people with big buckets of money to listen to us as an issue, because we've done all that, we know everything we need to know. And so we got money from various places, including National Landcare program and little dribs and drabs, to get trials in the ground, because it's a long-term story. So trials in the ground is number one, and then let the years go past, we can always come back to them and monitor stuff. And we're wrapping all that up in a package that we call Future Soils, which ultimately will deliver some new tools that we can use to work with growers to make better recommendations about managing acid soils. So not just how much lime, but how to apply, and if you are going to only surface apply, then how much lime. But in that same paddock, if you're going to incorporate, how much lime. That's a different thing. Anyway, so I'm going to talk to you today about stuff that you'll know about already. How much time we spend may vary, but the introduction to the talk's the same as if you're a group of farmers or not, but the emphasis will be different. I am going to lose friends in the room today, I reckon, right? So I'm going to say stuff that you're not going to like, and you're not going to like me because I'm going to say that, but sometimes you have to hear things. And likewise, tell me to get stuffed as well, all right? So that's fine. Rightio, we care about acidity because it affects plant growth, number one. It mostly does that through changes to nutrient availability. And graphs, in the first slide that you put up was about extension of soils, right? And I'm a visual person, so I show pictures and I have graphs to show how things work. And I know people that have decades of extension with growers, and they go, Jason, why do you keep showing graphs? Farmers hate graphs, they don't understand graphs. And I reckon that's just crap. Farmers do understand graphs, and they are really good tools to get messages across, but you need to explain it to them, and they're more than willing to lap up the message. So here I've got plant availability of nutrients and soil pH. So all of my graphs on the left-hand side is more acid, and the right-hand side's more neutral, tending to neutral. So we've got a bunch of elements that do that become more available in acid soils: iron, copper, zinc, manganese, aluminium, and word on the street is they're all metals, right? So metals become more available in acid soils. And when I talk to farmers, I say, if you had a metal shovel, and you stick in a bucket of acid, it will dissolve. And so the shovel is not plant available, but if it dissolves, the iron in that shovel will be. So metals dissolve, and that's how you remember it. Metals become more available in acid soils. And of course, as the availability goes up, you can create some problems like manganese and aluminium toxicity. Going the other way is molybdenum. Now, I need to have feedback from you. You're going to tell me stuff, and I'll listen to it. One of those talks I gave, Jim was here, he told me, Jason, you need to be careful with molybdenum, because when you've had a history of molybdenum going out and then you lime, you release a lot of the molybdenum that's in the soil, turn it into available molybdenum, and we get livestock problems with swayback. And it's like, right, got that. And I'll show you some work that we did based on that conversation. So very appreciative to you, Jim, for actually flagging, hey, this might be a bit of a problem for you because we've seen it. So I'm me, I have two eyes and limited time and only a certain number of years in the game. Collectively, we've got years, centuries of knowledge, right? So share it, and that's how we get ahead real quick. So molybdenum can be deficient in acid soils, and I went to La Trobe University where I did my degree, and we were taught if it was an acid soil, you can put moly out and fix most of your problems at very low cost. You can lime it, but that's more expensive. Okay, so there are places where if you've got an acid soil or a moderately acid soil, moly fertiliser was the go-to off the shelf to fix your problem. And then, so that's fine. It did fix, adding molybdenum to this would get more availability to the plant, but any molybdenum that wasn't used by the plant will go back into the soil and revert to an unavailable form. P looks like that, a bell curve, and it looks like that because at low pHs, iron and aluminium bind up the P, and at high pHs, normally it's bound up with calcium. But somewhere around 6.5 is the optimal P availability, and that's pretty academic, right? Like there are reasons sometimes it's not as simple as that, but that's what we work with. Aluminium toxicity is something that we talk about a lot because it's the impact of it's very visual. People see it, they get it. Not all acid soils have aluminium toxicity though. But just to go through that, here we've got a graph, pH and calcium chloride, low pH on the left, 6.5 on the right, so more neutral. And then we've got aluminium percentage going up the y-axis, and so this is percent of the CECs occupied by aluminium. And of course the CECs are the bits that hold the nutrients that plants need, so if you've got more and more percentage of those places filled up with aluminium, a nutrient that plants don't need and is toxic to them, that's a bad show, right? So any points going up here is bad. I'm going to show you data from New South Wales, cropping and pasture, but literally thousands of data points. And the relationship looks like that. Cool, and then one last thing I want you to see in that is that if you get up over 5.5, there is no plant available aluminium, right? So it converts to a form that a plant can't get. It's in the soil still, but a plant can't get it. I've got a line in here, as a horizontal line, blue line, about 5%, because again, like I can only remember certain things at university, but one of them was that if you can keep your aluminium percentage below 5%, you can grow most things without any drama, right? Except that I reckon that's crap. And so we've got trials, so that's canola. We've got the control treatment, which in this soil had 2% aluminium, which you'll identify that as being below 5. So should be okay. And yet when we lime it and get rid of the aluminium, you actually get better roots. And so when I say better roots, deeper tap roots, more fibrous roots up near the surface where they're going to get P and a lot of other immobile nutrients that the roots have to go to get. So that's a win. And it's at 2%. So it's still having an effect. So I reckon that blue line is problematic. It really depends on what you're growing. And if you had an acid tolerant plant that could take 10% aluminium, well, that 5% aluminium benchmark is a bit stupid anyway, because you've got a plant that can withstand it. On the tolerance though, as the people that breed tolerance, by definition, their tolerance is that it has it's within a 10% reduction of yield. So tolerance isn't silver bullet, you don't get a yield reduction. It's an acceptable yield reduction of 10%. Put that in context of when you change cultivars, what are you chasing? How big are those gains that you're chasing? Like 2%, 1%, So tolerance isn't everything. Okay. Aluminium really hurts root growth. Manganese toxicity hurts shoot growth. You probably know that already. But you can see here on the left, lucerne. We use these dig sticks, which is just a rod with a slot machined in it. You bang it in the ground, twist it, pull it out. It comes up like with an apple core sort of thing. You go to Bunnings and you get yourself a soil test kit, spray the indicator up it, put the white powder on and see the colour change. And when you do that, this thing had good pH, 7, 6.5, 6, down to about 15 centimetres, and you got excellent root growth to those depths as well. Over here, you had pHs of equivalent of about 4, 4.5 in calcium chloride, and the roots only went 5 centimetres, which was the bit that was probably about above pH 5. And so that really stunted root growth. Who cares? This thing has heaps more carbon in the soil, doesn't it? This thing is more resilient because it has deeper root system, and so when the rains don't come, it can extract water from deeper. This thing can pull nutrients from below that may have leached out of the surface, your sulfates, for example, nitrates. Whereas this is a 5 centimetre pot in a paddock. Above ground, it's lucerne. I sowed lucerne, it worked, came up, but when the season turns and it starts to stress, you lose productivity real quick. If it's a legume, nodulation decreases with acidity. That's a really, really important part. Often when we're talking about liming, we talk about yield response to the lime. You actually have a systems response to the lime. And work that CSIRO, DPI in New South Wales has been involved with cropping sequences have showed the value of legumes in the rotation, nothing new there, but the value is driven by the nitrogen that's fixed by the legume. In an acid soil, you will still have the legume, but it's not fixing the nitrogen that you need it to do, right? So that fixation is super important. There are other efficiencies, that phosphate binding to iron and aluminium in acid soils that I mentioned. It means that your Olsen Ps or Colwell Ps soil test values will be low. Your response to that is to put more fertiliser on. More of that fertiliser that you put on gets bound up in a form that a plant can't get. So you're inefficient. Whereas you increase the pH, the P that you put on, more of that gets to the plant, right? So you get better bang for your buck, and then the other part of it is you probably don't need to put so much out all the time. All of that I've spoken about so far, you can find in the literature, nothing new there. The bit that's coming, that I'm finding when talking to people like yourselves, you then get phone calls, hey, I saw this. And so what we're seeing now is where you've limed or you've removed the constraint of acidity, you then have less stressed plants, which then handle diseases or insect attack better. And so the photo here is wedge-tail wheat, dig stick. Went out here because an advisor said, can you come and have a look? I've got a rhizoctonia problem. Plant pathologist said, hey, I'm going out, have a look at this. Do you want to come with? It's like, yep. So grabbed my dig stick, off we went. He went out in the bad patches. Yeah, it's rhizoctonia. That's the problem. I put the dig stick in, compared good and bad patches. So I always carry 2 dig sticks because you always use them to compare good and bad. It's a great tool. The bad, the rhizoctonia patches had low pHs. The good, where there's no rhizoctonia, didn't have low pH. The problem was acidity. The symptom was a stressed plant that then couldn't handle the disease and got towed up by rhizoctonia. So identification of the problem is a big step because otherwise you treat symptoms instead of the problem. The other example I have is it was a canola crop. The advisor got called because the farmer thought he had a spray drift problem. The advisor got there, noticed that there's actually aphids all over these canola plants. We've got an aphid problem. He had dig sticks, he did good and bad. The aphids were in the acid bit. And where this plant, the soil wasn't acid, the plants weren't stressed and there were no aphids there. So there again, you could spray the aphids, but that's not fixing the problem. So there's a bit of stuff there that we need to capture, more information we need to capture. And of course, these are, everything I've said here is all, and the nodulation, that's all saving to the system. If that's not good, it's costing you. Adding lime or fixing acidity is not just about an increase in yield, it's about a saving in the system inputs. It pays you back in many different ways. And I always say it pays you back when you need it most. It pays you back in bad seasons, stressful seasons. Rightio, agriculture is acidifying. This is a message that as advisors, you just need to have in your hip pocket, because sometimes you deal with people that go, acidity is not an issue for me. It bloody is. It's an issue for everybody because agriculture is acidifying. It happens because when plants take up nutrients, as a result of that, it excretes acid into the soil. As a plant, which may be pH neutral, if it excretes acid into the soil, the plant itself is now alkaline because it balanced acid and alkali. It just got rid of the acid, so now it's alkaline. And so in a natural system, that plant would die and the alkalinity would go back to the soil to neutralise the acid that was formed, and that's a cycle, and that's how everything's balanced. But in agriculture, we remove the green bit. And so we're taking the alkali out, either as grain, hay, meat, fibre, right? So animal product, we're removing that, leaving the soil acid. So even if you don't have an acid soil, you're still acidifying the system. And so the question becomes, when does that become an issue? And that depends on your pH buffering capacity, your starting pH. We supercharge the system by putting urea and ammonium in, using legumes to get nitrogen out of it. All of these things create more acidity. So they're all good practices and you make money doing them, but the other side of that is you are actually creating more acidity, and at some stage you're going to have to balance that to be sustainable. Otherwise you are degrading your natural capital. Just a bit of evidence from that. So again, pH acidic on the left, neutral on the right, soil depth down to 20 centimetres. So we went looking for sites to do trials on, and we found a place up north of Canowindra. There's a picture of this. There's a hill, all the same slope within this paddock, but there was a little section that was fenced off with an old cemetery in it. And so the rest of the paddock had been farmed for about 80 years, but the cemetery hadn't been. So cemeteries are great for soils. People always love cemeteries because that's, hasn't been under agriculture. You do have to be careful where you dig holes, but put cores in. So going to 20 centimetres, we figured we'd be right. That's what the pH looked like in the cemetery bit. 40 metres away in the paddock that had been farmed for about 80 years. Good soil, CEC's a 10, so quite fertile, good yields. The farmer managing it actually put lime out, 2.5 tonnes of lime per hectare every sort of 15 years-ish on average, 10 to 15 years, which is good practice. That's what people have been telling them to do. And after all of that, that's what the pH profile looked like. Okay, and so you've got that there, and then here we've got acidity. So this curve, what we call pH stratification or subsurface acidity, is super, super common, right? That's what agriculture does. Right, now some of you who haven't seen that, the reason maybe why is the sampling depth. I want to talk about this. This is the bit where you're going to not like me, right? So sampling depth. When you take soil samples, how do you do it? Okay, so 0 to 10. Here's a 0 to 10 soil sample. pH is 5.3. Given the graph I showed before about aluminium, at 5.3 in calcium chloride, do we have an acidity problem? Right, so here are I'm going to give you two soils now that have a 0 to 10 of 5.3. That's what they look like if you sample it in a 5 centimetre interval. Right, so if that's what you did, you'd know now that actually in the 0 to 10, whilst its average might be 5.3, the reality is that the 5 to 10 is at about 4.5. Now do we have an acidity problem? Yeah, we do. That soil's the same soil. The only difference is the way we took the sample and the knowledge it gave us. And if at 4.5, now would you be considering liming? You and the grower? Yep. And would you be taking some options off the shelf in terms of what I could sow? You should be, right? And so I've seen this play out where people have got that, and they've got that, the farmers have put out lime, so they've done the practice, they've done the 0 to 10, and they've got the answer that says we don't have a problem anymore, and they've gone out and had a complete crop failure because acidity is still in the paddock. Right, so that's the reality, and I'm hitting you with that because the come back the other way, those 5 centimetre samples, you've just increased my cost of analysis. Right, so let's save some money and not do it, and let's have a crop failure. How's our savings going, champions? right? Not so good. So the cost of analysis is nothing. Difficulty in taking samples, we'll get to that too. But you can see the value in that 5 centimetre interval stuff, yeah? Rightio, down the track now. I've got to 30 because that's how we do it. So this is my data. That's how we do it in all of our research stuff. Commercially, I'm saying, based on what I've seen, you wouldn't go beyond 20 centimetres unless you really wanted to, if you're chasing something of your interest. But 20 centimetres, going to 20 centimetres, what that gets you is this trend. So we've got two soils here, a blue one and a red one. To the right here, within this area here, it's trending to the right. Whereas the red one, still vertical, still acid. I put it to you, knowing that tells you an awful lot about what you can do from a management point of view. That blue soil, its problems are all within your reach. The red soil, it has bigger problems, right? Deeper problems, which you're not going to fix this today. So there's a conversation to have about, do we have to add lime or do we just cultivate this stuff in so it mixes it in? You'd get an average somewhere above probably 5.1 or something like that, just from the mixing. Okay, and I'd say if you're going to do that, reward the risk of cultivation by actually putting the lime in there to do the job properly, right? So I would, but that's doable. That same management though, on that red soil, hasn't fixed our problem, has it? So you'd still be limited to what you could grow, but you are moving into a direction of improving things down the track. You got me on that? That conversation that we just had, I reckon, and you got to tell me, when I talk and you think, Jason, you are full of it, like call me out, don't let me get carried away. But to me, that's a crucial conversation because it changes your management decisions and it's giving your client or you assurance that your recommendation is robust and you're not going to send them down a path of disaster. And it's just knowledge, it's just information. And you get it by 5 centimetre intervals. So these 5 centimetre intervals to 20 centimetres, not all the time, just when you're concerned about lime. And you might be concerned about lime because your client's talking about growing something that you know will be sensitive to acid soils, or you've used your dig sticks and gone out and picked bad patches, bung it in and found out actually that bloody hell, we've got acidity here. It's, you know, green, the indicators are showing green or purple in the top, but it's yellow below that. That's our problem. You would never make a lime recommendation off a dig stick if you are, like I was going to say other things there, but bit rhymes with dig stick. But anyway, so that would not be good advice. You need to take the cause properly to get your defined 5 centimetre intervals. Now, when talking with people such as yourselves, they normally say, Jace, we can't make money doing 5 centimetre intervals. It takes too long, right? I've got other things to do. I've got more clients to get to, more soil tests to take. Well, that's fine. Use these 5 centimetre intervals in the paddocks where you are targeting or you're suspecting acidity, subsurface acidity is a problem. That's number one. So it's not all paddocks. Number two, use the right tools. I use cores like they're inch cores. They're about 80 centimetres long, and I've got a bunch of them, like I have 25 of them. And if assuming an area of uniformity in a paddock, I'll do cluster sampling, so 5 locations in that paddock, GPS logged, drive to one of them, 5 cores go out, and that's literally me throwing them into the ground. And if the ground's hard, using a post driver, like a 4-stroke post drive, Christie post driver, in 5 cores, core goes back in the ute, and then I pull those cores out by sticking a screwdriver through the hole on the top and pulling them out, putting those 5 cores into a container, driving onto the next site, doing it again, driving on to the next site, doing it again, next site, doing it again. That 5th stop, then I push out all of those 25 cores into corrugated iron trays and cut them up into 5 centimetre intervals. Now, I'm not going to do this for everyone, but and the people that just say we can't do it, it takes too long, just say, give me a paddock, give me a day, I take my gear out there, and like I did this 2 weeks ago with a guy, We drove into the paddock. 15 minutes later, we're driving out of the paddock, and he's like, "Shit, right, okay, got it." You know, so I just can't do that everywhere, but it's not a long period of time. It doesn't take long, but the information that you get is super valuable because it makes better decisions from it. I'm saying go to these 5-7 minute intervals if you're concerned about acidity, if you're concerned about growing something that you know won't like acidity. Take the sample, use it to make a liming recommendation, and then 2 years later, come back and do it again to make sure that it did what you thought it did. Because I've got lots of examples where people have done what they think should work, and when you go back and check, it hasn't. We've got trials like it. I've got a trial that's got 7 tonnes of lime on it, using various methods of incorporation, different machines, and it still has an acid layer with high aluminium at 10 centimetres. And we ripped it, by some of those machines, to 25 centimetres. Right? So just because you saw it get incorporated doesn't mean the lime moved. The only way you'll know is by testing. Okay, and I said 2 years because it takes time for lime to dissolve, and so it means you don't go putting lime on and then sowing that sensitive crop that year because you're going to hurt yourself. Give yourself time for the lime to work. Only analyse things that you use. I gave a talk like this last week and asked how many people soil sample, and like half the room put their hand up. It's like, what do you get done, or how much does it cost? It's like $130, we get everything done. Cool. What do you do when the analysis comes back? What do you look at? Oh, pH and coal wall P. It's like, right, so why spend $100 on stuff that you don't use? Instead, pH, exchangeable cations, coal wall P, or for Olsen P if you're into that, carbon if you're interested in it, right? But those first 3, $40 probably, $40 to $50 in one layer. So that's $200 maybe for my 20 centimetre detailed. $200. And now you probably already spent 130 on it if you're just doing 0 to 10, which got you a number that means nothing. That's for pH. And then it's got a whole bunch of other numbers you don't even look at. So don't do it. Pay for what you use. Fair? Rightio, liming strategies. Our old liming strategies don't work. You saw that with the graph, with the cropped area with the cemetery, next to the cemetery. You know, that person had been putting lime out and they still had an acid problem. So people have been sampling 0 to 10, maybe 10 to 20, and then they've got these triggers in their head that if the pH is less than 4.8, then that's where aluminium starts to come in. So maybe have 4.8 as a trigger. If my pH gets below 4.8, maybe that's my trigger to re-lime. And then we taught people, put on enough lime to bring the pH up above 5 to remove the aluminium. So we ultimately ended up telling farmers to work in this space, right? So lime, put on enough to make the aluminium go away. Agriculture acidifies to a point where aluminium starts to come in and re-lime. So we keep bouncing in between this. Fair? Right. How stupid is that? Because what you're basically saying is, let's put on just enough to make the pain go away, and then just wait until the pain gets really bad before we fix it again. Or I say, tell me one other part of your life where you accept pain here whilst having the solution to that pain in this hand, but choosing not to use it. Right, now some of you maybe have that, but I don't want to hear that side of your life. But yeah, you got me? It's dumb, right? You are suffering. You are suffering a loss. And it might show up. It may not show up in a good year, but it will show up in a bad year. It'll show up in a hard year when you need that plant to be happy, and it's not. So this is, I put it to you, this is kind of stupid. And then there's other things as well. So this practice, we're suffering pain, and we know we still have acidity at depth anyway. So we haven't fixed the problem, but people are spending money on it. I want to show you this. So this is, graphs are changing now. Now we've got pH up the y-axis. and we've got years down here because I'm going to show you long-term trial data. And it's 0 to 10, 10 to 20. Because it's old data, they don't have the 5 centimetre interval stuff that we do these days. Rightio. Now, normal practice, that lime to make the aluminium go away, re-lime when it starts to hurt. So we've got an acid soil at pH 4.5. You put on lime up to about 5.2 or something like that. Agriculture acidifies. You hit 4.8. That's your re-trigger to lime. Put the lime on, pH goes up, agriculture acidifies. So I call this the sawtooth of lime maintenance, and that was our best management practice from 1980, the mid-1980s through to 2018, right? That's what people did if they were doing the right thing. And the data shows you'd make money, that'd be worthwhile. The problem is, down here at 10 to 20, the situation just keeps getting worse because we haven't actually addressed it, but we keep acidifying it, right? Now, if we change that and we make the pH above 5.5, so we aim for a target, and now extension-wise, in all my talks, I talk about greater than 5.5. And when we survey people, they here get 5.5. And so we're having a discussion of do we tell people the target's 5.8? Right? I don't have any data to say it's 5.8. It's up there somewhere. I know 5.5 is not enough.
People need a target. You say above, they just hear the number you say.
That's right. The minimum. It's always a minimum. So thank you for that feedback. So lime to a target of 5.8 here, agriculture acidifies. The trigger to re-lime, 5.5. So the mindset is your top 10 centimetres, don't let the pH get below 5.5. So now we have, it's still a sawtooth of lime maintenance, isn't it? What's the difference? What's the difference between this and that? It's at a higher target level. And to get that, what did we have to do? You had to put more lime out here. Now this more lime, 3.7 tonnes. That's how much that was. Now, if I said to you, we're going to fix this soil, I'm going to put 3.7 tonnes of lime out, how many people do you reckon that your clients would say, get out? Yeah, it's crazy. You're talking crazy talk. Is 3.7 just a ridiculous number? No? Doable? Really, here you're putting on 2.5 anyway, so the marginal difference is 1.2. 1.2, put an extra 1.2 tonnes out. Okay, right? That's not even an argument, is it? So our new target is 5.8, right? So it's 5.8 if you want alkalinity to move down into acid layers. And it doesn't mean the whole profile has to be 5.8. It means that to scale, if this is my top 10 centimetres and I've got an acid layer here, I need this to be 5.8. So the alkalinity from here can get down into this acid layer. But this acid layer, if the pH down here starts going up to 6 or something like that, this acid layer, I don't need it to be at 5.8 because I don't want it to have alkali moving below it. Does that make sense? Yeah? So it can be 5 and we'd be fine. Now, this is my fault, right? The fact that we didn't know that or people weren't using it is my fault because we used to teach people at uni calcium carbonate is insoluble and we used to say it breaks down and it ultimately turns into calcium and 2 alkalis. Right? That's how lime works. It increases pH. And that's what we did, and we did that because it was simple. But what we didn't tell people was that it's not that simple because there's actually a step in between. When you add lime, the first step, it actually turns into calcium bicarbonate. Calcium carbonate, insoluble, doesn't move. Calcium bicarbonate, soluble, it moves. It moves with soil water. So it's the thing that's getting down into that 10 to 20 centimetre layer to make the pH go up. So calcium bicarbonate's formed, and you get some alkali, the pH goes up. In an acid soil, there's still more acid there. The acid consumes the bicarbonate, and you're left with calcium, alkali, and alkali, which is what we taught, that simple message. Now, why that pH above 5.5 or 5.8 matters is because That transition happens depending on pH. So if pH is at 8 and 7, calcium carbonate is pretty insoluble. But as we go down, calcium carbonate operates around pH 6.5 to somewhere around 5.5. And below that, the acidity is so great that the bicarbonate doesn't last. It just bang converts straight to calcium and an alkali. So you have no ability to move because you have no soluble content anymore. Fair? So this is what we should have been teaching and what I teach now. This matters. And when you keep the pH up around 5.8, you get more of this in the soil, so you've got more of a chance for it to move. So if you don't have the pH up over 5.5, you don't get the chance to move, and which is why all of our historic liming shows you still end up with acidity below where you put the lime. Yep. And you wouldn't know any of that if you didn't take 5 centimetre intervals. Right, acting early matters. So here I've just got 4 soils that like we've seen. And you can see here, if this red one, if that was yours, you'd know you've got an acid soil, you'd have some sort of liming program in place. This one, you probably wouldn't because the pH on average is above 5-ish, and so it's not too bad, but you can see the curve is there. You can see this curve is there. And so all of these are moving to the left. The more years we farm, they keep moving to the left. What we're saying is that maybe we should address this here, right? So this thing, maybe we should be adding lime to this to get the pH higher here to make this curve go away. We should definitely be liming this to address the acidity now at pH 5 rather than here at pH 4.5. Why? Because pH is a logarithmic scale. And I used to talk about that, and I used to put numbers on it, and people would sit there and you could see that, yeah, they heard what you said, but I really didn't think people got it. So what I've done now, the way I talk about it now, I put it in pictures. So if you're at 7, pH is balanced, right? If you added 1 bucket of acid, it would take 1 bucket of acid to get to pH 6. Right? And if you like, it would take 1 bucket of alkali to get from 6 back to 7. But because pH is logarithmic, 1 bucket to get to 6, but 10 buckets to get to 5. Right? So more acid in, much more, 10 times. But you're also going to put 10 times as much alkali in to get it back. And then at pH 4, that's what 100 buckets look like. That's a lot, right? That's a lot. And so, if you let the soil get to this, you've got a lot of lime that you've got to add just to get back to that. The other important part of this is, I know people that say, oh, yeah, look, we soil sampled and, you know, the pH is 4.8, but it was kind of like that a few years ago, so it's really not an issue for me, right? But what they're really telling you is, I'm acidifying my soil, I just keep adding these buckets, but the gauge isn't changing, right? The problem's still there, but they don't see it because it's a logarithmic scale. If they were up here, that same farming practice, you'd see the pH drop and you go, bloody hell, that's acidifying, isn't it? So it's kind of masking the effect, you got me? So it gets you 2 ways. It masks the effect of your management, and then it costs you more to fix it. Now on that, here, we've got a bunch of trials. I'm going to show you one, because I'm about to run out of time. But what we've got in our trials, we've got lime to hit a target of about 5.2, which is the old school lime to make the aluminium go away, right? So we've got a current practice treatment there. We've got lime targeting 5.8, so what I'm telling you what we should be doing. We've got the situation, if you're not going to incorporate, and you calculate that I need 6 tonnes of lime to neutralise this much soil, but you're not going to incorporate, you're going to put 6 tonnes of soil, 6 tonnes of lime on the surface, then probably the pH in that surface soil is going to increase to a point where the lime's not going to dissolve. And that's a waste of resource, because that lime not dissolving could be better spent in another paddock. You got me? So the question is then, if you're not going to incorporate, then maybe we put little bits of lime out more often. So put the lime out, let it dissolve, increase the pH, put more lime out once it's needed. So it's like, think of it like a sponge that you fill up with water and it starts to drain, and once there's more room to put more water on, just add some more water then, rather than put a bucket of water on at the start. Does that make bad analogy? Right. So little and often. Now I know you sitting there going, that's fine, Jason, but it costs us money every time we put a spreader in the paddock. I understand that. This is the research to find out whether the cost outweighs the benefit or vice versa. So that's what that is. And then we've got treatment here, which if you are going to incorporate, people are saying, I minimum till, like the benefits of my soil by not cultivating, I don't want to do it. We're saying that's fine, we get that, but we're not saying cultivate every year, we're not saying cultivate every 2 years. Let's just do it once in your lifetime. Once in your farming generation, this 30 years, do the incorporation, but put on enough lime to actually neutralise the acidity to the depth of incorporation. Do it once, and then after that you should be able to just top dress on the top, keep the pH up near 5.8, and you'll never have to do that cultivation again. Does that make sense? So that's why that once in a generation is. So these are 3 sites, and they have different starting points. So these 2 are quite acidic. This is worse. This is very acidic. In fact, both of those are like the soil that you spoke about, with heaps and heaps of aluminium. And then we've got Tugong, which is up here at sort of, 4.8, 4.9, so not too bad. The aluminiums wouldn't be, well, they aren't really bad. And we're saying, we're looking at these soils, this is act early. Let's act early, so we're trying to fix a good soil, or maintain a good soil rather than fix a basket case. That's what we're doing there. Now, this is the rates of lime to achieve these targets. And you can see here, like 7 tonnes for a once in a generation, like 3 tonnes, 6 tonne. Even just making the aluminium disappear was going to cost 5 tonnes here. So actually not huge marginal differences. But if you don't let the acidity get bad, you're talking about small rates of lime. Okay, so acting early is important. Now here's the hard sell. This is a hard sell for me, because we in the agricultural world have trained people to only do something when they see a benefit. Right? So this herbicide or that, pesticide, with and without, see the difference? Do it. You got me? Where I'm saying, do this now, you won't see anything, but it's good. You got me? That's a hard pitch, except for coal-well P or phosphorus fertiliser. There's heaps of people put super out every year because you just do. Right? They're happy with that. So that's flips my mind, because they're happy to do that, but they're not happy to lime without seeing a response. That's a hard pitch for me. Now, a few minutes, Jason. Yep. Flying through this. So here's this Landcare site. You understand those lime rates, you understand these treatments. We incorporated here with a horse tiger. So I know they're around this area, I know that. So the farmer bought that and then had to buy the tractor to pull it, right? So big money in doing this. Right, I'm going to show you some data. 30 centimetres pH here, as you've seen before. That's our control. So it's quite acidifying. These are LSD bars, so if you can fit these bars between data points within a layer, then they are significantly different, right? If the data points are further apart than the size of those bars. So here's our standard rate to just make the aluminium disappear applied to the surface. So we can see it's exactly what we saw in that cemetery paddock. You put lime on the surface, it doesn't change much down here, but it does where the lime is. That higher rate to keep the pH up at 5.5 in the 0 to 10, that's what that average is, but that looks like that. It's very similar, isn't it? Here's our 3 tonnes, which is our little and often, but it also just happens to be not too far off what standard practice would have been, that 2.5 tonnes to the 2.5 tonnes to the hectare every 10 years. And you can see it's done exactly the same. So we haven't actually got much difference after 2 years of application. When we go incorporating though, you get this big benefit to depth. Now the horse tiger cultivated or ripped down to this, and it mixed to about 15. There's a difference between cultivation and mixing. They're not the same thing. So mixing actually puts lime through the soil. So that's to hit a target of 5.2. Here it is at that slightly higher rate, and we just got a little bit more up here, but they're quite similar. There's once in a generation. So you can see the benefit of putting enough lime in to get rid of the acidity. And because here, there's 5.5, so there's a bunch of alkali here that will move down. But with the cultivated lot, you've actually got a head start. You've already got rid of acidity to about 15 centimetres. Right, so that's a real win. What that did in the paddock, this is the paddock looking over from one hill to another, any plot where we had incorporation of lime, you can see the phalaris was just awesome. And so we actually solved the acidity problem and created another problem, and that is this. That farmer is a really good farmer, really good at growing phalaris clover pastures. When we removed the acidity constraint, the phalaris took off and outcompetes the clover. So now we've got a grazing management or pasture management problem to deal with. It's not therefore don't do it. It's now we've got a different problem to handle, right? So when you remove a constraint, the system behaves differently. And then you've got new management. You don't remove the constraint and keep doing what you've been doing. Different trial, same treatments, same sort of effect, cultivation getting us a win. This is 2% aluminium. And so I can tell you, this trial, I didn't expect to see differences. This is at Temora. FarmLink look after this trial for us. This is canola last year. This is 4 tonnes of lime incorporated. This is a control. 2% aluminium. This is manganese toxicity. A wet year, manganese becomes more available. Where we limed, we actually protected the crop. We didn't have manganese toxicity where we limed. So yet another benefit where lime's paying you back when you need it most. And I don't have the yield data yet because I still haven't got it off the guys. But just wrapping up. So now what? We know when you remove the constraint, you get better root growth. That plant's going to behave differently to the plant that you used to manage before you fix the acidity. I've already said that. So what are the nutritional changes? What are the changes to soil carbon and soil biology? So we're looking at those things now. In some of our sites, we see this really clearly. This is canola, grazing canola. And so this is at Morven near Holbrook. Where we limed, the plants took off, they grew really well, and they outcompeted all the weeds. There were no weeds there. In the control, there were weeds everywhere, right? Because the germination was so bad, the establishment was so bad, because it was constrained by the acidity. So there's a benefit to the system. Same paddock, they put out a lot of urea on this paddock. They drive the system pretty hard. These values up here, this is nitrate content in the plant. They all had the same amount of urea added to them, but here we've got 350 parts per million nitrate. Here we've got 1900. So this thing's took up more nitrogen.
That's a good one to show growers.
Yeah, so once you fix the constraint, don't keep doing what you're doing. We need to go tissue testing and finding out how much do we need to add. So there's savings there. So about that molybdenum toxicity, when you lime soil that's had molybdenum on it, more molybdenum going into the animal, it makes the blocks absorption of copper in the rumen, and you get a copper deficiency in the animal. That's the problem. And so we had an honours student, Grace Caveney, come and work with us. So she had a little pot trial here. Here's a control. That's clover. Grows all right, doesn't it, clover? Yeah, happy with that. A lot of people put molly out if they're going to establish a pasture. Is that fair? Does people do that? We had one of our trials near Burrumbuttock. Can you see the brown lines through here? Right, so this is a drone shot of canola on one of our long-term sites. And Nick McGrath's at Holbrook Landcare. Jace, we've got a bit of a problem here. We've got these brown strips, right? So we took tissue samples, identified it as molybdenum toxicity, and it just so happened it was the same week that Grace started getting these pots that the clove was dying in. So we knew that moly toxicity not only hurts ruminants, it hurts plants as well. And when you go into literature, no one talks about it because they're all worried about deficiencies. So this is new. And so this was my oh shit moment, because I've been getting out there saying lime over pH 5.5. Well, that's what that looks like. I thought, bloody hell. And then spoke to the grower, hey, what do you do with moly? Oh, every time we put a tank in that paddock, it's got moly in it. And it's like, oh, okay, so it's just you. And then we did a workshop in that area and said, hey, how many of you use moly? And everyone put their hand up. And it's like, why? And it's like, oh, well, this guy said we should use it. So 20 years ago, they had a really good agronomist, brought canola into the area. You put moly on because it was marginally acid soils. That's what you did, and it worked. Okay. What's happened though is people just kept doing that, kept doing it, kept doing it, kept doing it. pH keeps going down. They start getting legumes that don't nodulate, crops not performing, root systems not growing. Okay, now it's time to lime. Lime, all that molybdenum that's been put out over years and years and years, that's turned into an unavailable form at low pH, has now been liberated in a high pH soil and is now becoming toxic. So our message is this: if you've got a history of using moly and you lime, stop using moly. Okay, and then moving forward, probably tissue tests periodically to see if your moly levels are dropping off into a deficiency state. The paddock had been horse-tigered, but that thing is bogged whilst they are sowing canola with a spreader, right? Because no other implement could get on it. So when you go cultivating, you create a bunch of new problems. And so we've got soft ground now, so trafficability is difficult with machinery, especially if it rains. Grazing, a lot of people will incorporate lime with the cool new machines and then want to go having dual purpose crops on them. So you've got, crops coming up, get the animals on as soon as possible, but the soil's this nice, light, fluffy, friable soil, and you just put heavy animals all over it and they just compact it right in. I do all of the coring in all of our trials, literally do thousands and thousands and thousands of them every year. The hardest soil I've ever cored, we broke stuff doing, was something that had a horse tiger through it 3 years before. They grew lucerne in it, grew fantastically, series of 3 other wet years with lucerne growing really well, lots of animals, just compacted the soil. So you went brrrr, and then soft. So if people want to go incorporating lime, and people do because they like machinery, right? As mentioned in one of the talks, diesel porn, right? So just don't bring up hostile subsoil, so sodic soil. Like, do your aggregate stability tests to make sure that the soil in your depth of incorporation isn't dispersive. So incorporation does get you a head start. It's a winner, but not everywhere. So pick your battles. And if you do it, put on enough lime to do the job. I see growers around home, they've bought the machine, but they still put 2.5 tonnes of lime out. And even say, oh, it's pretty hard to justify putting more out, isn't it? And it's like you just spent $230,000 on the incorporation machine. It's a capital expense, it has long-term benefits. And I say one of the benefits it has actually gives you choice. You're not locked into growing plants that can exist in acid soils. Now you can grow whatever you like for whatever purpose, whether it's rotations, chemical rotations, whether it's chasing higher prices of enterprise or whatever. Agriculture acidifying process, don't ignore your good soils. Your good soils will create its own problem if you don't maintain them. You just don't keep driving your tractor without changing the oil. You maintain the things that work well for you. Sampling at 5 centimetre intervals to 20 centimetres defines the pH stratification and equips you with the information that you need to make sensible, good decisions. Without doing that, and this is where you're not going to like me, if you're just doing 0 to 10s to make recommendations about liming, you are hurting your clients. And I know people that go, oh, it's too hard, we don't want to do it, we'll just keep doing that. They're basically saying to me, I'm such a lazy bastard that I'm prepared to take your money and give you recommendations I know are wrong. And that's totally unacceptable. Totally unacceptable. So we've got to take those 5-7 minute intervals where you think acidity is a problem. And then 5.8 is the target. Slides are changing based on what you told me. So 5.8 is our target if you want the lime effect to move deeper. Okay?